It's all well and good naming a boat after Alan Kurdi, the boy that may or may not have died, under the circumstances that they claim he died. Was he real? Was he not? Was the story behind his father real? Was it not? I don't know. Nonetheless, it was the story that was used to further push the narrative that we needed to embrace refugees en masse, which soon became migrants en masse. And of course, now knowing what I know now about the UN Migration Compact and the plans put in place years before the refugee crisis even started, I can't help but be even more sceptical now of the supposed death of Alan Kurdi. But nonetheless, this independent journalist doesn't see it that way. He goes on to say, since Alan's death, a great many other men, women and children have ended up dead too. Their hopes drowned as their lungs filled with water. They have not become symbols. They have not inspired campaigns. And I wonder why that is, because they actually drowned, in my personal opinion, whereas Alan Kurdi didn't. It's always the situations that they contrive or fabricate, or at the very least have a helping hand in, that make the headlines, whereas real events never really get touched upon unless they can spin it in their favour. It's nearly 3.5 years later since the death of Alan Kurdi, the questionable death, let's leave it at that, the Syrian refugee whose body was washed up. Kurdi and the photographs of his corpse, which made him look like a doll, being greatly washed by the waters of Aegean, became an emblem of the refugee crisis that was part of the plan that was enveloping Europe. He could have been anybody's kid. For a short time he was everybody's. Well, in July of 2015 alone, more than 100,000 people have arrived in EU countries, and 2016 the same thing occurred, 2017 the same thing occurred, 2018 the same thing occurred, and that's at least 100,000 illegal immigrants. But of course, where the Africans came from is beyond me, because at that time that he's talking about in particular, it was Syrian refugees. Remember that? The Syrian refugee crisis? Do you even remember Syria? Because we've been overwhelmingly seeing African men now, but back then there was no justification for them at all. Now they're fleeing poverty in Gambia. On the other hand, we saw migrants pushed back at border posts by security forces, unloved, unwanted, forsaken, because they're entering countries illegally. If I rocked up at the American shoreline and expected to be let in because I'm a migrant, I mean, it's unheard of. I would never dream of doing something like that, and I still to this day would love to really find out what went through these African men's minds to think there's Syrian refugees jumping on boats and going over to Europe because they're fleeing the war that's in their country. Let's jump on a boat and see if we can do to it. And then all of a sudden you've got waves of Africans joining the party and being allowed to continue to do so. It's a bit strange, is it not? Unloved. I mean, when we know which side of the fence this guy lies on. On the other, we witnessed the unprecedented openness of the German authorities, welcoming refugees with grace and open arms. Oh yes, over 1 million of them. Yes, and look how they've repaid them. In Britain, politicians facilitated. After Kurdi's death, The Independent, having decided to publish an image of his lifeless body on our homepage and on the front page of our print edition, petitioned the government to change its policy and to admit more refugees. Davy, the then Prime Minister, eventually confirmed that the UK would take in 20,000 people fleeing Syria, but the target was never reached. On Sunday, a German ship operated by the charity CI, which rescues refugees who get into difficulties crossing the Mediterranean, and this is the fucking cusp of this problem. This is why this crisis continues to be just that, a crisis. And the way the papers, the way the politicians, they all speak about it so matter-of-factly, as if this is happening, this will continue to happen. So it's about how you react to what's happening that really should be the talking point of the day. You know, an operating ship that just floats about, and if they're in convenient difficulties, which they all end up in, they're always in difficulty, that's why they get picked up. So if they're not in any difficulty, well, they just rock on by then. Let them on their merry way to enter European territories illegally. Fuck off. I mean, come on. Which rescues refugees who get into difficulties. Oh, yeah. Spokesperson for CI said the decision would stand as a reminder of what our work is really about. It's about actual persons like Alan, Caleb, and Rena who drown in the Mediterranean daily. And whose fault is that? You keep throwing the blame game at the people that oppose it, because what you want and what people like you want is for an open border policy for everybody to just up sticks and leave, which a lot of them would do naturally. For the time being, it's somewhat eased by the fact that they're still having to jump on the wee dinghies, so they can't all jump on dinghies at the same time. But nonetheless, it's not our problem if they take it upon themselves to up sticks and leave when they know fine well there's a potential for them to die. And if something tragic does happen to one of them or their loved ones on the way over here, that's your fault, if anything, because you're sitting waiting for them. So if you just by chance missed them, or you were rescuing some Somalians when the Gambians decided to enter the water and the Gambians drowned, that's your fucking fault. Every time you pick them up and you take them to Europe, they know to phone back home for their brethren to repeat the process, because you keep picking them up and taking them here and criticising and crying and whining to everybody that refuses them entry in the reports. This never-ending crisis is only going to be a crisis until somebody finally takes a stand and criminalises these people if they continue to make these journeys over here, and in the meantime threaten them by refusing them here. Pick them up, take them back. They soon get fucking bored. But of course, they'll do everything bar the obvious. And that's where it should be apparent to most people, if not all, that this thing is all premeditated fakery. They are both right, of course. As Abdullah Kurdi, when he said, "My boy on the beach must never be forgotten." Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that the father, this is what I remember briefly from that story, that there was something regarding his teeth. They were fine, they were safe where they were, but they decided to jump on a boat, and subsequently something happened in the water. So the narrative surrounding him and his son was frowned upon. There was a lot of questions that were being raised in regards to just what sort of danger was this guy even in to begin with, when it seemed he had a pretty cushy life where he'd managed to reside. And then as a result, he wanted free dental care or something along those lines. I'm not going to paraphrase in case I've got it wrong. Anyway, but what does the world want to remember? Since Alan's death, a great many other women, men and children have ended up dead too. Their hopes drowned, blah, blah. Their kindness, the kindness that inspired Merkel to open Germany's borders, has dissipated. Suspicion about migrants' backgrounds and the reality of their refugee status has become the overriding feature in many of the public discourse around the subject. Because there is an ever-growing amount of them, and they keep fucking coming because it's been made so easy for them. I mean, European countries continue to argue about whether responsibility for processing asylum claims and rehousing refugees is being equally shared. And that's not anybody's problem, bar the people that have allowed them here in the first place. Anti-immigrant parties have been significantly headway, notably in Italy, which has taken in African arrivals in huge numbers. They have played on fear and on protectionist instincts. Well, in the one breath, you keep telling us that our populations are on the decline. They are below replacement levels. And then in the next breath, you start importing in African men en masse. It seems to me that there's an inevitability that's on the horizon, and that is at some point, the tipping point will occur, where we will become a minority if the trend continued to go the way that it's going. But of course, any fears that are alluding to something like that are always met with the usual, oh, it's just fear-mongering. No, it's not. It's pretty simplistic maths, if anything else. Fucking hell. America, the land of opportunity, elected a president who spent 2 years doing all he can to close borders and isolate his nation. Yes, okay. His portrayal of immigrants has been bleak as it's been inaccurate. The number of refugees to be accepted to the US for the 2019 fiscal year has been capped at 30,000. Yes, because they've got their own problem with millions of fucking Mexicans. Syria may be more stable than it was in the summer 2015, but real peace remains elusive, as it does across wide swaths of the Middle East and Africa. What the fuck has Africa got to do with this? Why do they keep just dropping in additional information and speaking about it in such a manner that it's always been the case? Making you second guess yourself. What the fuck has African people that are fleeing poverty and wanting a better education got to do with the plight of Syrian refugees? I don't really see the connotations. All I see is a bunch of Africans that have well and truly exploited the foundations that were laid in place for the premeditated, orchestrated Syrian refugee crisis. Even though it may seem extraordinary that anyone would want to come to Brexit Britain or Trump's America, the West still offers the chance of a better life for those who face danger. Oh, they all face danger though, don't they, when they all climb on their fucking dinghies? When you actively encourage them here, they will continue to come. It's no coincidence that there's only been apparent that we've got a major issue since they allowed it to become an issue. So is that the number of displaced people and refugees around the world continues to grow, around 25 million currently, according to the UNHCR. The vast majority live in countries that have already enormous economic and development challenges. Of the 10 countries which host 60% of the planet's refugees, Germany is the only fully developed nation among them. Naming a boat after Alan Kurdi is a wonderful gesture, though it will not lessen the grief that his relatives will still feel for his death. More importantly, it will also certainly do nothing to force policy changes in those countries which are best placed to help people who are fleeing war, political repression, or natural disaster. Or what about all the Africans? What reasoning are you going to give for them? Bandwagon jumpers? That's about it, really. For that to happen, the West will have to examine its collective conscience and decide whether compassion means anything if it is so tightly rationed. We have shown far too much fucking compassion. And that's the problem here. We've been taken for an absolute mug. And day in, day out, campaigners, activists, journalists like this guy, and politicians, they all allude to the fact that more needs to be done. But the more you do, the more will come. It's not rocket science, folks. You know what I mean? The dog and pony show that is the migrant crisis will continue on as normal until such times when they really turn the screws on their migration compact agreement. In the meantime, we have to listen to the insufferable bullshit constantly, from the pleas, the heartfelt pleas to prevent deaths and to put things in place to help the people that are taking it upon themselves to embark on a harrowing journey. Well, I have to say, and I know it sounds somewhat callous in some regards, that sympathy is like water off a duck's back to me. Knowing what I know now, I can't feel sorry for them, even if I did before, which I didn't really, bar the refugees that were being forgotten about in favour of African men. But nonetheless, these people are only over here because the powers that be want them here. It's got fuck all to do with their pathetic excuses for the most part. Nonetheless, peace.